That sound better, Mr. Albers?
Yes.
Oh, good.
An improvement.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, welcome everyone, and welcome back, Mr. Longfield. Great to see you. And I'm so pleased that we're also pleased that things went so well, and that you were only absent for one meeting, and you're ready to get back in the saddle and ride along with us here. The Madam Clerk will check with House Resources along the way to see if there's any possibility of meeting for 3 hours as we had wanted to do through the motion we adopted. Right now, we only have 2 hours, but things can possibly evolve. So I'm just giving everyone a heads up on that. And also, I just want to make a couple of brief comments about the rules. Number one, ruling from the chair on any amendment or sub-amendment is not subject to debate. So a member who disagrees with the ruling may challenge it, and a vote on the challenge will be held immediately. So there's no debate. If you disagree, say disagree, you challenge the chair, which is your right. And if that's the way we go, then we'll have a quick vote and without debate. The other thing is, last meeting I may have been a bit liberal with the time. I'd like to remind myself and members about the routine motion the committee adopted with regard to amendments from independent members. Madam Clerk, would you please read the motion that we adopted a while back, which I have not been fully respecting?
Certainly. The motion you're referring to is ordinance of reference from the House respecting bills. The first section A and B discuss the independent's ability to present motions of amendment and have them deemed moved. And then the last section deals with clause by clause. So during the clause by clause consideration of a bill, the chair shall allow a member who filed suggested amendments pursuant to paragraph A an opportunity to make brief representations in support of them.
Okay, so that means on amendments proposed by Madam May gets to present them and discuss them. Correct? Hello.
That is correct.
Okay. So we had a very long session.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Just wanted to ask you a quick question in regards to the suitability of a challenge to the chair. I'm not challenging the chair in any way, shape, or form, but I think it's important just to ask this question. So, I'm not of the ilk that believes that when you challenge a chair, it should actually be challenge a chair's ruling, is what I think it should be, rather than challenge a chair. If you really want to challenge a chair, you should just vote the chair out and then put in someone else that you like. And that none of that's on discussion today.
No, I meant challenge the ruling. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. But if that does come up, I would imagine that just for better understanding, building goodwill, is to ask a question as to how you justify a ruling. I think is important, because quite honestly, I do think that when a member of parliament does write an amendment to a bill, particularly when it's gone through the law clerk, that and all the work that entails with that they should be able to receive an up and down or down, where members can not like the bill or not like the amendment, but at least have a vote on that. So if there is, let's say, theoretically later today or another clause by clause meeting, if you say I'm ruling this particular thing out of order, I do hope that you would entertain a question or two just so we can understand that, rather than just immediately jumping to conclusions and challenging the chair. I think that's probably a better thing for you, and I think it's a better thing for each of us as parliamentarians to understand the rationale for why you would not accept something. Maybe it's on advice from the legislative clerk. Maybe it's something that you just in your own head, but I would hope that you would entertain and actually just respond to a couple of questions, just so that we can move on. And again, we may all agree, or someone may have a question. So I just hope that we would still be able to do that, much like we did in the last meeting.
Yeah. So first of all, yeah, when if I have to make a decision to render an amendment, unreceivable. I always give a meeting. I always give a reason. So I elaborate the reason. Now, Madam Clerk, would questions would that amount to debate, or would that just be a normal course of events for a member to say, well, but then the member can't. My understanding is if we start going back and forth, then that's debate. But is it admissible, Madam Clerk, for a member to say, well, I don't understand why, more specifically, why you said this in your decision or whatever? Is that considered debate, or that would seem reasonable as long as we don't start, arguing the point.
Exactly. As long as it doesn't become debate, if there's a question or two, but when it becomes debate, then you're.
Yeah. Okay. So it's reasonableness. And
well, can I just ask another question then? Because quite honestly, a challenge for a chair actually has to emanate from a member. And sir, I don't think you would challenge yourself. So
no, but I would give you ammunition maybe to challenge me.
Yeah, but to be clear though, as I asked a number of questions and the words challenge the chair in terms of a formal motion never came out. So I would hope that we would not be viewing something as debate unless it was specific. I move, challenge the chair, et cetera, then that would go to a timely vote. And that is not debatable. I think that's what you're trying to say. Now, just in regards to Madam May, you said that you took responsibility for having her. To me, it seemed that the committee motion, as long as she does not seem to be filibustering the process, but for goodness sakes, if someone has gone through the work of writing up an amendment and perhaps some clarifying clarifications are in order so that other members of parliament can say, does your amendment mean X or does it mean Y? To have her respond, as long as she, again, is not filibustering, but is actually engaging in good faith, I would hope that would qualify as well.
Oh, yeah, that's not what I was referring to. No. Absolutely. When Ms. May has an amendment, she can speak to it and discuss it with members. I don't think that's a problem. I was just reminded that when it comes to non-Green Party amendments, only members of the committee can speak to them. Is that correct, Madam Clerk?
Yes, that's the.
Okay, but if it's Ms. May's amendment, we'll have back and forth. Yeah, no worries.
Okay, no, that's I just wanted to make sure because I may disagree with many of or so far it seems with all of them, and hopefully Elizabeth doesn't hold that against me long term. But at the same token is that if we've given her a process, members' rights, and again I know that she takes issue with the process being done this way where she can't do it in the main chamber. But again, Mr. Chair, I appreciate the clarification from you, the clerk.
No, that won't be a problem. No. Okay, so we were at, if I'm not mistaken, NDP 2, and in respect to clause 9. So, Mr. Bachrach, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move Ms. Collins' amendment. And the amendment reads as follows for those who are following along online, that Bill C-12 in Clause 9 be amended by adding after line 16 on page 4 the following. 2.1, the emissions reduction plan for 2030 must include an interim greenhouse gas emission objective for 2026. And if I may speak to this, Mr. Chair, from the beginning, the NDP has called for a 2025 emissions milestone. We heard from so many witnesses that clearly indicated the importance of such a milestone, as well as from the world's leading scientists who have been clear that it is not enough to wait until 2030 in order to have accountability. The minister, however, has made it clear that he is not willing to accept a 2025 milestone. And we believe that this compromise solution, in addition to the additional reports between now and 2030, the progress reports and the Environment Commissioner's reports, and the fact that the 2030 target will be reviewed in 2025, all of those measures will provide additional accountability in the lead up to 2030 and will strengthen this bill. The bill has taken so long to make its way through the House that 2026 is not that far in the future. And this is, we believe, an important accountability measure. So I hope that my colleagues will see fit to support this amendment. And I'll leave my remarks at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bachrach. And just a reminder after speaking, if members could take their hand down so as not to confuse the chair. Mr. Redekop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question, I just want to question the word objective, because I noticed that in previous clauses, the word target has been used. And so if we use objective, is that confusing things, and should it say target? And maybe Mr. Bachrach has a comment on that, but I'm just questioning the use of the word objective.
Mr. Bachman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, there is other wording that I would have preferred as well, but this exercise is about building enough agreement to get these changes through the committee. And that was the language that was agreed to, that we feel that we can get agreement from the majority of the committee members towards. So I do think that the language objective is clear enough that most people would understand that to mean a specific reduction by 2026. So that's certainly my understanding, and I believe, my hope would be that the government would understand it similarly. Mr. Chair, if I may, I neglected in my initial remarks to note that it appears there's an error in the amendment, and I'm not sure on whose part this error took place, but I've been notified that in the French version, it should read after line 17, and apparently it has a different line number. So
okay.
Perhaps if we could ask for a bit of assistance there and make sure that is remedied.
Madame.
True. True, yes, indeed. Maître Tivierge. It does seem that there's an error here, yes. I would think the French version should read, at the correct line. Is this something that we can correct easily? Yes, it's merely in the instructions, so we should read that Bill C-19 in Clause 9, C-12 in Clause 9 be amended by adding after line 17 in the French version. So this is carried, then it will be put in the right place in the final version. Thank you very much. I also noted in the wording of the amendment in French, we mentioned paragraph 2, but that's not mentioned in the English text. Is this a problem? No, it is not, given that 2.1 means paragraph 2. It's simply when the legislative drafters drafted this, they agreed that this was a better way to put it in French, but it's fine. This said, we would need Mr. Bachrach's consent for the small change to the line number. Mr. Bachrach, will you agree to having line 14 changed to line 17 in the French version? Given that you have suggested this?
Yes. Okay, parfait. Madame Michaud.
Ms. Michaud. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the NDP MP has mentioned, they've been asking for a year set at 2025, and they've agreed now to agree to an interim objective for 2026. This is unfortunately not what they asked for, but I imagine that it's an interim deal, if I can put it that way, that they have with the government so that it will look reasonably good, better than nothing. Thank you. Mr. Albus. Mr. Albus.
No? Okay.
Nope, pardon me.
Okay.
For whatever reason, it seemed I was muted.
Okay.
Hopefully the second time's the charm. I was hoping to see if Mr. Moffat or another official from the Government of Canada could be here so I could ask a few questions about NDP2.
Well, Mr. Nevison is here. I don't. Is Mr. Moffat here too?
Okay, there's Mr. Moffat. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I was looking because I wanted to carry on a little bit with some of the questions that I had. So again, to Mr. Moffat, so first of all, is there any significance in NDP2? It refers to emission, singular, versus emissions, plural, in the rest of the bill. Is there anything to that that we should be aware of in by having something that is referred into as emissions in most of the bill versus what's envisioned in NDP2?
Mr. Moffat?
And I'm going to apologize to the committee. I had trouble getting on. I'm just bringing the document up, so I just need to have a look at the provision. I apologize. I'm not quite ready to answer the question.
Okay, well, Mr. Chair, if we could either just go on to another member who has questions, or perhaps Mr. Bachrach wants. I know this wasn't originally his motion, that he submitted. So I can't pester him for whether or not he meant to include an S or not.
There are no other speakers. I don't know, Mr. Moffat, how close you are to bringing the document up. Basically, what Mr. Alves is saying is the English reads as follows: the emissions reduction plan for 2030 must include an interim greenhouse gas emission objective. Should it be emissions objective? Is this something that?
So, I can't speak for the intention of the person who wrote the amendment. I think it should have an S on it. That's the way the term has been used in the rest of the bill. So to be consistent, and I think there should be consistency throughout the bill. Just to be clear, the terms are used interchangeably. The reason emissions is used is either because of reference to emissions from multiple sources, or because of the fact that there are multiple different types of greenhouse gases which can be combined into emissions.
Okay, so I have a number of questions further, but I know Mr. Bachrach did raise his hand. Mr. Chair, process, did you want Mr. Bachrach to jump in and just answer the question?
Yeah, regarding the S, yes. You're on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that we can chalk this up to a simple error, and certainly consistency is important, and I'll look to other members to put forward sub-amendments that can fix that and make it plural. I think that's probably the most logical thing to do.
So would someone like to do that? Mr. Longfield, you propose a sub-amendment to the amendment to add an S after emission?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I'm out of sequence in terms of whose hand was up first, but just for the purpose of this discussion, if we need a sub-amendment, I'd put that in for adding an S. Thanks.
Is there unanimous consent? I believe there is. So that problem is solved. Mr. Redekop.
So just back on this issue of objective, now that Mr. Moffat is here, I'd like to ask Mr. Moffat, I'm not sure if you heard before, but I asked the question of the word objective versus the word target. And from your perspective, is there a difference in meaning to the word objective or target, or would the legislation treat both words equally?
Mr. Moffat.
Sorry. Oh, I'm not on mute. Okay, sorry. No, I think they'd be treated differently. A target is already used in the Act, and there is, as you know, a requirement for targets for every 5 years. So the term objective is a different term. I think it's I think it would have, but it would nonetheless require like a numerical outcome, and it would require, in the context of this amendment, for a plan to achieve it and for progress reporting against it.
So to be clear, the way I understand the word target in this legislation is that it's a hard number. It's something that needs to be achieved, needs to be reported against, et cetera, et cetera. And is it, so are you, just to be clear, you're saying that objective in the context of this amendment would have the same weight and meaning as target? Is that what you're saying?
I think it's a slightly different meaning. Each target in the bill, as currently written, has to have its own plan. In this amendment refers to an objective, which would be contained within a plan, and I think the expectation would be that plan, that 2030 plan, would include measures to achieve the objective, but there wouldn't be a standalone document or plan that would be specifically associated with the objective.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah. So just to be clear once more, so what you're saying is that this actually isn't a 2026 target. It's just wrapped into the 2030 target, and it's going to be one of the interim paths along the way to get to the 2030 target. So it's not a standalone 2026 target of any type.
Well, just to be clear, not in the legal sense used in the Act as a target that has its own independent plan. There would be a number that would need to be articulated. That number would be public. The government would be held accountable for it. There would be measures to achieve it, and there would be reporting against its achievement.
So it's a target then?
I'm trying to distinguish what we might commonly refer to as a target and the way in which target is used in this Act. And the specific difference is that in this Act, each target has to have a standalone plan. In this case, there would be no standalone separate plan associated with this objective. But in the common sense of the word, there would be a number, there would be measures to achieve it, and there would be progress reporting against it.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'm okay to let this drop. I just want to say that it seems like Mr. Bachrach talked about this deal that was made and how they worked hard to get it. It seems like this isn't what they aimed for and somewhat lacking, but I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Madame Michaud.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given what Mr. Moffat has just explained to us, I wonder whether I could propose a sub-amendment replacing an interim objective with a target. This would make it truly binding for 2026 and not merely something that's part of the 2030 target that as such would not be a standalone. I think, Madam Clerk, that we have right to one sub-amendment, correct? Yes, indeed. The first sub-amendment has been adopted, unanimous consent, so a second one can be put forward. Very good. Ms. Michaud. Given that you have given us a verbal version of your amendment, do you think this suffices, or do you think that Ms. Michaud should send this in writing to the clerk? If she has it in writing, it would be wise to send it to the clerk, and if she has it in both official languages, that would be helpful. I don't think that a sub-amendment requires being put in both languages. No, not to move it, but she could at least repeat it so that we could take careful note of it. Yes, I think it's pretty straightforward. That's why I'm suggesting that we might just save ourselves a little time here. Ms. Michaud, could you just tell us exactly which word you'd like to change? Just tell us once again. Yes, I would only change an interim objective to a target.
Wants to change include, instead of saying 2030 must include an interim greenhouse gas emissions objective, she wants to change it to say must include
a target,
a greenhouse gas emissions target for 2026. So I think it's pretty clear. So I have Mr. Albas.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if this is the proper process or not for me to be asking. I was going to ask a few questions. So will I be debating the sub-amendment by Madame Michaud?
I think at this point it has to be related to the sub-amendment. Okay. If I'm mistaken, if one of the clerks could tell me, but it seems to make sense to me that, we need to get rid of this sub-amendment before we go on. Yeah.
All right. So what I think I'll do, Mr. Chair, is I'll just listen to some of the debate, and I may jump in, but I think my thoughts were more having to do with the not the sub-amendment, but the original NDP 2 amendment.
Okay. So is there any debate on Madame Michaud's sub-amendment? Madame Michaud, suivi de Monsieur Bacharach.
Oui, mais j'ajouterais seulement.
Yes, well, I will simply add that, as Mr. Bacharach mentioned earlier, I think this was the NDP's original intention and of all the parties that are seeking to strengthen this bill, give it some teeth. So an interim objective does not really carry much clout. So I think it would be much smarter to put target more binding.
Mr. Bacharach.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Chair, you cut out there. My question through to Madame Michaud is, given that what we heard from Mr. Moffat, I'm curious what additional stringency calling it a target would provide. I believe that there is Mr. Moffat has laid out the distinction between this interim objective and the target, which is that the target gets its own plan, and the midterm objective gets referred to in the 2030 plan. I think that's the main difference there. But it seems like if we were to switch to a 2026 target, it would come with there would be other required amendments so that the bill could be consistent. And I guess that's my challenge. Now, this is the language that we've supported, the midterm objective. I think if we went back to square one, if the NDP had written this legislation from the beginning, it would look very different, as I'm sure it would if the Bloc Québécois had written it. So we're trying to, at this point, come together and find enough agreement that we can pass a bill that achieves the main objective of some semblance of accountability. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Could you take your hand down, Mr. Bacharach? Okay. So seeing no further comments, we'll go to a roll call vote. I assume everyone wants a roll call vote.
Yes,
Madam Chair. Madam Clerk. However, if you'd like to chair this meeting,
that's quite all right. That's quite all right, sir. You can keep the job. Okay. So we're voting on the sub-amendment of Madame Michaud. Mr. Baker.
Opposed.
Mr. Biddle.
Opposed.
Mr. Longfield.
Opposed.
Mr. Saini.
Opposed.
Ms. Sachs. Opposed. Mr. Albas.
Abstain.
Mr. Gennaroux.
Abstain.
Ms. McLeod.
Abstain.
Mr. Redekop.
Abstain.
Madame Michaud.
En faveur.
And Mr. Bacharach.
I'm opposed.
Okay. So that is 1 in favor, 6 opposed, and 4 abstentions.
Okay, so we now go back to the main amendment. Mr. Albas, you wanted to speak to the main amendment?
Yeah, thanks so much, Mr. Chair. I'll start again with asking a few questions of Mr. Moffat. So the word interim, is it just the general, my understanding is unless there is a definition outlining what interim means, it's just the regular usage of the word, pull off a dictionary off of your bookshelf and look up, in this case, interim. That's what would apply here. There's no other meaning to it under this act.
So this is a question?
Yes, it's a question.
For
Mr. Moffat.
Mr. Moffat? No.
Yes, I think that's the correct way to understand that term. It doesn't have a specific meaning in the Act.
Okay. So as my colleague had pointed out earlier, when we're talking about target versus objective, it's just the common parlance or understanding of the day. There's no legal description. And that's what you were saying earlier. I just want to make sure I'm absolutely correct on that point.
Yes, I think you have to read the collection of words, interim greenhouse gas emission objective for 2026.
Okay, and there's no other reference in the bill to the word interim. This is the only usage that's there.
To my knowledge, that's correct. We can. Okay. I've got a team that can double check in the next few seconds.
Yeah, if you could ask them to do that just to confirm that. So in regards to NDP 2, just a quick question. Is there any impact on our nationally determined contribution within our international requirements of in regards to an interim greenhouse gas emission objective? So by adopting this language in the bill, does it do anything outside of, anything impacts our international commitments whatsoever in regards to a national determined contribution?
That's a question for Mr. Moffat.
Yes, they're all towards Mr. Moffat.
Okay.
Well, I think it would provide additional specificity to that NDC, because the NDC is more than just a number. The NDC is the number for 2030, the target, if you will, in common parlance, plus the measures that will be put in place. And in Canada's case, it would likely include some form of a trajectory. So, and the inclusion of an interim greenhouse gas emission objective for 2026 would provide some additional specificity that could be included in that NDC. It doesn't change the international commitment that we've made to have an NDC. When it doesn't change it doesn't undermine any of the commitments that we've made regarding the kind of detail that would be part of the NDC that we submit to the United Nations.
So who would decide? Because if the term itself, interim greenhouse gas emissions objective for 2026, who would decide what's in that? Because as Mr. Redekop had said earlier, there's a lot of specificity in regards to what goes into a target. So who would arbitrate that, what goes into that report?
Sorry, the report or the interim objective?
The interim emissions objective.
So the way the amendment is written is that the emission reduction plan would contain that objective. The obligation to establish a plan is in section 9.1, and that obligation is on the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, who must in turn consult with other relevant federal ministers in developing each plan.
Okay, but there's no formal requirements as to what the specificity of that particular interim objective would be?
No.
So the minister would be able to unilaterally, of course, after consultations with other members of cabinet, has complete discretion over that. Is that correct?
Over the content of the
greenhouse gas emission objective for 2026.
That's correct. After completing all of the consultation obligations in the Act associated with the completion of the plan, which, as we'll get to when we get to the rest of the Act, includes consulting other ministers, provinces, Indigenous peoples, advisory body, etc.
See, one of the key components is transparency and accountability is what the bill purports to have. In this one, it sounds like the minister himself or herself, who ends up submitting this 2026 interim objective, sounds like they'll be able to decide. Is that the case?
I don't think it's accurate to suggest that the minister is given any different powers associated with establishing this objective from the establishment of the milestone year targets or the plans. So the obligation rests on the minister, but that obligation has to be discharged via a process that is established in the Act. That process, because the objective is part of a plan that is associated with that process, that the process is exactly the same. Up to you to decide whether it's adequate or not, but it's exactly the same for the objective as it is for all of the other components in the bill.
So, but Clause 8 specifically says when setting targets, the minister must take into account the best scientific information available. The objective, though, does not carry any such requirement, does it?
That's correct. That Section 8 does not apply. Both, as we've already discussed, both the preamble and the purpose provision in the Act refer to urgent action in support of achieving net zero emissions and complying with Canada's international commitments. But you're right. I think the Section 8 itself, the specific reference to best scientific information, does not refer to the interim objective.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moffat. You've been very helpful. One last question that I have right now at this time. Assuming that no other amendments related to this particular NDP 2 amendment come forward, what do you think the impact of NDP 2 will have on the Act if it's adopted as presented here?
I think it's pretty straightforward that the plan that has to be established for achieving the 2030 target, which, as we know, will be the NDC, among other things, will have to contain a number for 2026.
Okay, so a number, but whether or not what it's based on, we just don't know because it doesn't apply. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to let other members capitalize on some of your time. I'm sure that they have questions as well.
No, I think yours was the last intervention. So we'll go to a vote now, a roll call vote on this amendment, NDP 2. Madam Clerk?
Yes, so Mr. Baker.
In favor.
Mr. Biddle?
In favor.
Mr. Longfield?
In favor.
Mr. Saini?
In favor.
Ms. Sachs?
In favor.
Mr. Albus?
Opposed.
Mr. Genereux?
Opposed.
Ms. McLeod?
Opposed.
Mr. Redekop?
Opposed.
Madame Michaud?
En faveur.
And Mr. Bachrach?
I'm for the amendment.
Okay, so that is 7-4 and 4 against.
Okay, so it's carried as amended. And now we go to CPC 8, and I believe it's Mr. Albus who will be presenting that amendment.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So CPC 8, again, follows up with the approach the Conservatives have taken, and I hope that people don't deem that this is a conservative way of doing it. I think this is just a good proposal to make sure we have all hands on deck approach when it comes to our net zero and our climate commitments. And so in this, Mr. Chair, it would make a simple change that right now It's the Minister of the Environment, or whoever would be designated under C12 under future governments, whoever that designated minister is, really is running the show to the most part. And we believe that the minister can play a very important role by forming much of the work to bring to cabinet, but ultimately the governor and council should be establishing alongside that. So I would suggest that if we want to see where every minister that's around that table receive a presentation from the designated minister, to have a good debate over it, because this is a big country with different aspects of climate changes that affects different regions. We all know this, but to have every minister who has a point of view, and then to have a consensus, a whole of government, if you were, Mr. Chair, where they rally behind a particular issue and then make that and present that to the Canadian public and to the representatives in Parliament, that we believe that you would have a much stronger structure, and you would have a much better, more buy-in from the cabinet. So, Mr. Chair, without further ado, I would just hope that honourable members would say that this would be a positive change to C12, to see more than just one lonely minister out there, trying to deal with these issues and making most of the decisions based on various factors, whether it be the advisory committee, et cetera, or different components from what they've heard from their provincial or territorial partners, but to have a verbose discussion at cabinet and to have it ratified by the Government of Canada as cabinet, that's what the essence of this amendment would do. And I hope members might decide to change their minds from previous positions. Perhaps Mr. Longfield, now being back, might have a new perspective on it and might want to vote in favor of this amendment. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Alves. We'll go to a vote now, Madam Clerk.
Yes, so we're voting on CPC 8. Mr. Baker.
Opposed.
Mr. Biddle.
Opposed.
Mr. Longfield.
Opposed.
Mr. Saini.
Opposed.
Ms. Sachs.
Opposed.
Mr. Alves.
In favor.
Mr. Generer.
In favor.
Ms. McLeod.
In favor.
Mr. Redekop.
In favor.
Madame Michaud.
Contre.
Mr. Bacharach.
Opposed.
Okay, so that is 4 in favor and 7 against.
Merci. Alors, l'amendement est défait. Juste.
Thank you very much. So the amendment is negatived. I simply want to let you know that we did try to get the House of Commons permission, based on available resources, of course, to continue past 5:30 this afternoon. Unfortunately, that won't be possible today, but we are trying for Wednesday just to see whether we could prolong the meeting until 6:30 in the evening, but we will see in due time whether that can be accomplished. So I suggest that you not plan any other activities or meetings before 18:30 or 6:30 in the evening on Wednesday, 2 days hence. So that's the situation. Today, then, we will finish at 5:30 in the afternoon. We now go on to Ms. May's amendment, PV 14.
And this amendment is quite similar to the one that snagged us into some dispute and confusion last meeting. And it's to adopt recommendations from a number of environmental law groups. It happens that West Coast Environmental Law staff lawyer Andrew Gage was the one who testified before us, but he represents the views, as I've been reminded recently, of a large collection of climate groups and environmental law groups, that the both under section 7.4, we've already made the amendment changing 5 years to 9 years, 366 days. And I understand the expectation is that at report stage that can be changed to 10 years. So this is a parallel proposal, and I think quite consistent, although I don't see an identical Liberal amendment coming up soon thereafter. So I'm a little worried about this one, but I certainly hope it will be passed because it is consistent. And that is that in when you get down to the emissions reduction plans that attach themselves to the targets, so this is section 9, subsection 4 that currently reads, the minister must establish each subsequent emissions reduction plan at least 5 years before the beginning of the year to which it relates. I'm hopeful that we can change this from 5 years to 10 years. Again, I know that's the intention of the majority of members of committee, that section 7 sub 4 be changed from 5 to 10 years. So surely the subsequent plans should be targeted to the same year. And I would hope that the amendment as drafted for 10 years will meet with the approval of the majority of committee members. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Madame May. Je ne vois pas.
Thank you, Ms. May. I see no hands up. So we will put the question to vote by roll call. Ms. Clerk.
Opposed.
Mr. Biddle,
Opposed.
Mr. Longfield,
Opposed.
Mr. Saney,
Opposed.
Ms. Sachs,
Opposed?
Mr. Albus,
Opposed.
Mr. Jenner,
Opposed.
Ms. McLeod,
Opposed?
Mr. Redekop,
Opposed.
Madame Michaud,
En faveur.
Mr. Bachrach.
Opposed.
Okay, so that is 10 opposed, 1 in favor.
Merci.
Thank you. Now we go to G7, which will be moved, I am told, by Ms. Sachs.
And thank you, colleagues. Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to introduce a motion to add a new subsection 9.5 to the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. This provision will require the Minister of the Environment to take into account UNDRIP, the submissions and the advice of the advisory body, and any other relevant considerations when establishing the plan. This motion therefore ensures that various factors will be taken into consideration by the Minister when establishing an emissions reduction plan.
OK. Est-ce qu'on veut discuter de l'amendement?
Is there any discussion on the motion? I see no hands. So we will go to the recorded or roll call vote. Ms. Clerk.
In favor.
Mr. Biddle,
In favor.
Mr. Longfield,
In favor.
Mr. Saney,
In favor.
Ms. Sachs,
In favor.
Mr. Albus,
Opposed.
Mr. Jenner,
Opposed.
Ms. McLeod,
Opposed?
Mr. Redekop,
Opposed.
Madame Michaud,
En faveur.
Mr. Bachrach.
In favor.
So that is 11 in favor, 4 opposed. Or, excuse me, 7 in favor, 4 opposed.
Alors, l'amendement est adopté. Donc,
So the amendment is carried. I have a question for the committee. Clause 9. Shall Clause 9 carry? Are we ready to carry it as amended? I see no hands. Ms. Clerk, perhaps we could put the question.
And then Mr. Baker,
In favor.
Mr. Biddle,
In favor.
Mr. Longfield,
In favor.
Mr. Saney,
In favor.
Ms. Sachs,
In favor.
Mr. Albus,
Opposed.
Mr. Jenner,
Opposed.
Ms. McLeod,
Opposed?
Mr. Redekop,
Opposed.
Madame Michaud,
En faveur.
and Mr. Bachrach.
In favor.
So it's 7 in favor, 4 opposed.
parfait. Alors,
Very good. So Clause 9 is carried. And now let's turn to Clause 10 and the Bloc Québécois 10 amendment proposed to it. Ms. Michaud. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, we will drop BQ 10. We wanted to address BQ 11. There was a bit of a problem coordinating the two. I understand if we drop BQ10, we will then move on to G8 before we go to BQ11. So I would like to say that I would like us to discuss BQ11 before we vote on G8, given that the very same lines are at issue. We really did suggest changes to the legislation to ensure that true responsibility be ensured, that transparency be supported as well. That's all I'll say now, but for now, BQ10, we're dropping it. Thank you. Maître Tivierge, do we need the committee's unanimous consent to withdraw an amendment? No, it hasn't yet been proposed or moved, so there's no need to withdraw it. BQ10. You're right. However, G8 does address a part of the bill before the section for BQ11, so there's no way to change the order that we address these amendments in, even if we consent to it unanimously? Well, the problem is that it might make things difficult, given that G8 has no effect on BQ11. There would be no problem, really. Very well, then, unless members of the committee object, we will continue as planned, going to G8 now, and Ms. Sack once again will be moving the motion, the amendment.
Just before we move on, Mr. Chair, just a quick question on process.
Yeah.
Are we going to be going back to BQ10 or for all intents and purposes?
No, BQ10 it doesn't exist done? As far as we
okay.
concerned. Yeah.
Okay, no, I thought there was some talk about going ahead and then perhaps maybe coming back, but I see Madame Michaud is saying no, there's no intent.
Yeah, she's taking it out of the picture.
Yeah. Okay. If I could have some clarity too, Mr. Chair, my subsequent amendments that I have to clause 10, how would they be affected by adopting G8?
Well, I am told you're talking about PV like 15, for example. Oh, I see. You've got quite a few subsequent amendments. Well, I have no note here saying that if G8 carries, this happens, or if G8. So I'm going by what the legislative clerks are telling me. So I don't see any impact at this stage. And if anyone disagrees among the clerks, please let me know. So where were we? Ms. Sachs wants to propose G8.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, colleagues. Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to introduce a motion to amend subsection 10.1 of the Canadian Net Zero Emission Accountability Act. This motion requires the emissions reduction plan to contain, among other things, a summary of Canada's most recent official GHG emissions inventory, known as the NIR, a description of how Canada's international commitments with respect to climate change are taken into account in the plan.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll go to the vote.
And the vote is on amendment G8.
Oh, wait, just before you do, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Great. I just wanted to ask Mr. Moffat what the effect of adopting G8 will have on the bill, just quickly.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Moffat.
Yeah, the amendment is to require that the plan has to contain certain elements. So these elements could have been included in each plan. This simply provides more prescription to ensure that each plan includes each of these elements.
Okay, so in regards to the actual changes to the bill, though, are these all things that the government could already do? This is just gives it a little bit more, so to speak, meat on the bone as to it's more a prescriptive approach rather than an expansive approach. Is that correct?
Yes, more prescriptive to ensure that the government of the day preparing the plan includes each of these elements. So there is so Canadians can be confident that each plan will, at a minimum, contain each of these elements.
Thank you, Ms. Sachs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify for Mr. Albus and just also for my colleagues and the benefit for those who are interested in the amendment, this amendment includes projected timetables for the implementation and for each of the measures and their strategies. It includes projections for the annual GHG emissions reductions resulting from the plan's combined measures and strategies, and also a summary of the cooperative measures or agreements with the provinces and other agreements the Government of Canada is involved in to recognize the role and the accountability of all governments in Canada. So it's just so that we're clear on why I've put this forward.
Mr. Albus.
I appreciate Member Sachs explaining her amendment again, but I'm just going to ask a couple questions of Mr. Moffat. So first of all, let me say it's nice to see the government say that it actually wants to, have a summary of provincial actions, although it seems that it's rather contained in Section G as cooperative measures or agreements with provinces. So if a Government of Canada, future Government of Canada, or for this one, under this bill, let's say it's enacted, passes through both houses, becomes law. So Section G, does that mean that the minister can only put information on a summary of cooperative measures, as in ideas that both a province or a territory and the Government of Canada agrees to? And is it just limited to that? Or when it says agreements with provinces and other governments in Canada, could you maybe can you elaborate on that?
So short answer is no. Longer answer is that this is what has to be in. So it must contain a summary of key cooperative measures or agreements. It may contain descriptions of provincial measures and measures undertaken by, sorry, got a dog interfering with the action here. It may contain descriptions of measures, initiatives, policies being undertaken by other governments in Canada. The Act is careful to not prescribe that any other government other than the Government of Canada take action. That's different than what the Government of Canada can describe in its plan. It can describe what other governments have done or are planning to do. And again, what G does is it requires that every plan must contain this.
Okay. So in regards to the bill itself and the amendment, though, this just adds, again, a prescriptive quality of what must be in the bill. There's nothing in here, though, that goes further than what C-12 originally imposed. Like the minister could submit all of this information previously. It's just the minister must. But again, it's not beyond what the scope of C-12 allowed a minister to do. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to get that point across. And I'm also glad to hear that the dog you're referring to is your own, and not someone on a parliamentary committee. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Redekop.
Thank you, Mr. Moffat. I apologize because I probably should know this, but it's relevant, I think, to some future amendments, possibly. You say in here, it says in here in F, including projections for each economic sector that is included in Canada's reports under the convention. Is there an easy way to tell me what those economic sectors are? If it's too complicated, I'm okay, but because I don't know what those are, and that would be helpful to me.
I'm sure there is. I'd like to be precise, so I'll need a few seconds to gather that information. So we do provide in the NIR reporting based on UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change guidelines that provide guidance about how countries should disaggregate their reports across different sources of emissions. so we have a fairly standardized way that we provide that. It includes things like agriculture and buildings and heavy industry. I can get you a waste and others. I can get you the complete list in a few seconds. I apologize. I've just got some people working on that for you right now.
Okay, maybe we could provide that answer after we vote on. I don't see any other hands, and we should move on with the vote. So,
but just on that point, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
If I could ask, because one of the things that we were hoping to have in C12 that unfortunately would just due to previous amendments we weren't able to table was have a social and economic lens, because as I've said, there are certain regions of the country that will be exposed. So I just asked Mr. Moffat, when he gives us the list of economic sectors, is that broken down, if he could give the rundown of that, and is that broken down by province as well? Just because there are a lot of industries, for example, out west, Newfoundland, Labrador, that have even the Northwest Territories, have aspirations for their own economic development, and I'd certainly want to know if this is only going to be reported on an industry by industry basis, or if there's going to be some sort of regional breakdown. I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
So I can provide that answer now. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Let's get it.
So the UNFCCC guidance is that we follow requires us to report against the major sources. We do provide. Sorry. Let me first tell you what those sources are. They're heavy industry, buildings, agriculture, oil and gas, transport, electricity, and waste and others. Canada does also further disaggregate those by province and territory.
Okay.
So in other words, each source by jurisdiction.
Yeah. Okay, great.
And so will that then be included under this amendment and under G8?
Yes, and that's the goal. That's correct.
And if I could just further ask, Mr. Chair, the UNFCCC, now the information that we send to them, is this largely duplicative from that, or is this independent work, or is the minister, by adopting this, are we just literally just saying what you report to the UNFCCC now has to also be reported to Parliament in these blocks? So is it just redundant reporting, or just reporting in obviously to both houses? Mr. Moffat, you've been on mute. We haven't heard you at all.
My gosh, you missed my eloquence. It's precisely the same information, but it's associated with each plan, so you would get it on specific timelines as prescribed in the Act.
Okay, so essentially, this is the same information, just we're reporting to both houses on a slightly different timely basis. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So there's nothing really new in this other than the specificity or the prescribing that the minister shall include this information in the reports.
Yes, and again, this is the minimum that must be included in each plan.
Okay, so since we are going to be voting on this, Mr. Chair, Conservatives, we certainly believe in keeping our international targets when it comes to the ones before us. At the same token, though, this sounds to me like the Liberals are simply responding to concerns in the public, and they're trying to say, well, we'll just add a bunch of things that specify to make it look like we're chalking up this bill to be stronger. But in fact, what they're doing is they're just, again, listing things that the minister will already have to do, or at least this will present it as a prescriptive form rather than anything new or above what C12 originally intended when it first came to the House of Commons. Thank you.
Okay, so seeing no other hands up, we'll go to the vote. Madam Clerk.
Yes, so the committee's voting on G8. So Mr. Baker,
In favor.
Mr. Biddle,
In favor.
Mr. Longfield,
In favor.
Mr. Saney,
In favor.
Ms. Sachs,
In favor?
Mr. Albus,
Opposed.
Mr. Jennerer,
Opposed.
Ms. McLeod,
Opposed.
Mr. Redekop,
Opposed.
Madame Michaud,
En faveur.
Mr. Bacharach.
In favor.
That is 7 in favor and 4 against.
Okay, so G8 is adopted. Now we're on BQ11. Madame Michaud.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope you can hear me. Yes, we certainly do hear you quite well. I'm really sorry. I just turned on the air conditioning. It seems to be making a lot of noise at my end. As I was saying a little earlier, we wish to make the government's action plan a little clearer with our amendment proposed here. So we suggest that the minister specify what each of the points is so that each of them can be independently evaluated. Therefore, we have added descriptions of the manners in which calculations are carried out, method for calculating greenhouse gas emissions, measuring progress, tools for measuring them, and for assessing the impact of the reductions, a bit like what we suggested for another piece of legislation. It was a matter of ensuring that everything remained transparent, that we'd be able to clearly see how the minister lays out the plan and ensures that greenhouse gases really are reduced, emissions are lessened. So that's our aim here. Is there any debate? Mr. Albus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I first want to thank Madame Michaud for putting forward. She's certainly been an advocate in the House of Commons. We don't always agree on issues, but I hope we both agree that she's certainly doing her part to do what she can to put forward ideas that are important to her and to her constituents, I would imagine. I think also she clearly has seen that C12 is not the same as her own private members' legislation. And so I think her experience from working on that legislation is certainly being brought to bear here. What I would ask Mr. Moffat again is very similar to my line of questioning on the previous amendment with G8 is, can the minister, without prompting from Parliament, introduce all of these things in C12? Again, is this something the minister already has the power to again, a description of the measures taken to adding a description of the method for calculating greenhouse gas emissions? Is there anything prohibiting the minister from being able to do this, if C12 was to pass as is between both houses, with all the amendments we've had thus far?
So 3 points, if I might. First, yes, the minister could do this. Second, and of course, we'll get to these provisions, but clauses 25 and 26 are relevant to this discussion. 25 requires that the methodology used to report on emissions must be consistent with the methodology that we use for our NIRs. And those methodologies are prescribed by the UNFCCC. But then 26 allows the GIC to make regulations specifying methodologies, like additional methodologies that might, for example, be relevant to clarifying how reporting would be done on emissions and removals. So achieving net zero, for example. So long-winded answer, but the short answer is yes, the minister has that authority to provide all of these description already in the Act.
Well, I think Madame Michaud will then say, well, I guess if this doesn't pass, then I will just haunt the minister responsible until it's done. So anyway, I'll leave it to Madame Michaud if she has anything else to add, or any other member.
I don't see anyone having anything to add, so we'll go to the vote.
Mr. Chair, I've got a question.
Okay.
So I guess this is questions for Mr. Moffat, but if we get into the methods, the tools, et cetera, are we venturing into provincial territory here? Because a lot of these things, would they not be things that provinces will be required to do in order to achieve the goals that are set out in Bill C-12?
I think what we're talking about here are methods not for achieving reductions, but methods for reporting on emissions. And the federal government reports on emissions, again, following standardized international protocols.
Merci. Je vais Madame Michaud.
Thank you, Ms. Michaud. Perhaps in response to Mr. Redekop's question, at the Bloc Québécois, we certainly insist on respecting provincial jurisdictions. So we want to ensure, of course, that what we're putting forth here will not compromise that in any regard. We do know that with the bill here before us, the government is aiming for net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, but how will they get there? We don't have the details. That's our concern. We'd like a clear description of how they're going to go about it. And then, of course, in the report, which the commissioner would be overseeing, they would be able to evaluate based on the methods described. Thank you for providing these details. I see no other hands. No yellow hands. So we will put the question, Ms. Clerk.
So BQ 11. Mr. Baker.
Opposé.
Mr. Biddle.
Opposed.
Mr. Longfield.
Opposed.
Mr. Saini.
Opposed.
Ms. Sachs. Opposed. Mr. Albus.
Opposed.
Mr. Genouer.
Opposed.
Ms. McLeod.
Opposed.
Mr. Redekop.
Opposed.
Madame Michaud.
En faveur.
Mr. Bacharach.
I'm opposed.
That is 1 in favor and 10 opposed.
Alors, l'amendement est défait.
Very well. So the amendment is not carried. It's negative.
À l'amendement de Madame May.
Now to the amendment put forward by Ms. May, PV 15. The floor is yours, Ms. May.
C'est en sourdine, malheureusement.
Unfortunately, you're on mute, Ms. May.
Soleil.
So sorry.
Okay, sorry about that, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we're still in the rubric of Section 10 of the contents of the emissions reduction plan. My proposal is to stick in just after subclause B, which, as amended by the amendment of Madame Yaks and G8, is that there would be a subclause that calls for detailed information and modeling of the expected annual emissions reduction for the year to which the plan relates. In other words, greater understanding of the progress being made in annual increments as recommended by numerous groups and briefs that were presented to this committee.
Mr. Longfield.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. We've just seen Member Sachs had tabled her motion G8, that already addresses Member May's motions. Member Sachs' motions adds the provision in the Act that would require the emissions reduction plan to contain projections on the annual GHG emissions and reductions and the resulting part of the plan that combines measures and strategies. So I'd be opposing this since we've already covered that through Ms. Sachs.
Thank you, Mr. Longfield. Anyone else? Mr. Albus.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just in reference to Mr. Longfield's intervention, I'd like to ask Mr. Moffat just a question, is that obviously the government G8 is much different than Green 15, but in respect to that it's duplicative of that, is that the case? I don't remember in G8 there being any reference to modeling. Wouldn't modeling be something different than just some of the numbers that you pointed out earlier?
So they're not precisely the same, but I think they have the same effect. So G8 would add, among other things, a new sub F, projections of the annual GHG emission reductions resulting from those combined measures and strategies, including projections for each economic sector that is included in Canada's reports under the convention. So we have projections, sort of aggregate projections, projections for and projections for each sector already approved as being required. And so, as I say, this green, Partie Vert 15 would require detailed information and modeling of expected annual emission reductions. So to the extent that there's a difference between projected and detailed information and modeling, the legal terminology is different. The projections would have to be done, again, based on international methodology, which requires detailed information and modeling. So I think in substance, they cover the same thing.
Ms. May.
Just to make the obvious point, Mr. Chair, that if the amendment was redundant to G8, the clerk would have flagged that and have notified us before we passed G8 that my amendment, Partie Vert 15, was somehow redundant. It's sufficiently different, and it does provide more detail in the development of a plan so that people can track it, so that we have the title of the act being accountability. The guts of the act aren't there yet.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up. And so I would ask the clerk to do a roll call vote on PV 15.
Yes, Mr. Baker.
Opposed.
Mr. Biddle.
Opposed.
Mr. Longfield.
Opposed.
Mr. Saini.
Opposed.
Ms. Sachs.
Opposed.
Mr. Albus.
Nay.
Mr. Genevert.
Opposed.
Ms. McLeod.
Opposed.
Mr. Redekop.
Opposed.
Madame Michaud.
En faveur.
And Mr. Bachrach.
Opposed.
So that is 1 in favor and 10 opposed.
Thank you. So that it doesn't carry, obviously. We'll go to PV 16, and on this one, I have a ruling. And my ruling is that the amendment is inadmissible, and I will now take the opportunity to explain why. Bill C-12 requires that national targets for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada be set with the objective of attaining net zero emissions by 2050. The amendment PV 16 seeks to establish a carbon budget measure, which is not foreseen in the bill. As House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 3rd edition, states on page 770, quote, an amendment to a bill that was referred to committee after second reading is out of order if it is beyond the scope and principle of the bill. So in my opinion, PV 16 introduces a new concept that is beyond the scope of the bill. Is this just a clarification? This is a clarification, yeah.
I wish to stand on the motion that this committee passed that requires me to be here, that allows me to speak to my amendments. And the practice has been from other committees and other committee chairs, Mr. Chair, probably dozens, if not hundreds of times, that even if the chair rules that—
Yeah, go ahead. I should have let you present it first. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I would just like to draw the attention of the committee to the preamble, which we know doesn't have the weight in law the body of the bill would have, but the preamble claims that this bill is committed to reaching the Paris Agreement goals of as far below 2 degrees as possible, and preferably no more than 1.5 degrees global average temperature increase above the temperature at a global average that existed at the time of the Industrial Revolution. In order to do that, we're looking at far more than net zero by 2050. And I note that although clearly witnesses were significantly curtailed and expert evidence was not brought to the committee that could have been brought, we certainly did hear from enough witnesses to know that the key elements of successful climate accountability laws around the world are missing in this. And some of our witnesses were actually able to tell us that carbon budgets work better than percentage reductions. I'm not challenging the chair. I don't have any right to because I'm not a member of the committee. But I do note that every other climate accountability law around the world uses carbon budgeting to achieve the goals that this bill claims to want to achieve. So I'm surprised, Mr. Chair, that you have been advised that this is beyond the scope of the bill. Carbon budgeting has been requested by virtually every climate organization within Canada, certainly the member groups of the Climate Action Network and numerous others. We don't know what First Nations would have said about this bill because they weren't allowed to testify, but I really am disappointed by the ruling. I speak to this motion because it's really important that we understand we're missing the boat on climate accountability. But obviously with that, Mr. Chair, I think I've exhausted the time that the motion this committee passed, which requires me to be here, allows me to speak.
Okay, just a point of clarification, it's not that no one was not allowed to be a witness or to appear. We sent out invitations, and sometimes, not in every case was the invitation accepted. But okay, so
it went by pretty quickly, Mr. Chair. I think that's part of the problem when you're asking Indigenous nations to step forward and testify if they only have a few hours to know about it.
No, I don't think that was the case, but I won't get into that here. But thank you for that, and I will now ask you, Ms. May, to present.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Alves.
Yeah, but just before you move along here, I just had a question for you in regards to your ruling. So my understanding is that net zero itself is a state we end up. It's defined in the bill by 2050, and it's anthropogenic, et cetera. But there is nothing that necessitates which concepts or which methods are best. In fact, we've had a discussion about targets in the bill, but we've heard testimony about other things. Now, I disagree with the use of carbon budgets in this, but I do think it is important that people be heard, Mr. Chair. And I do think that Ms. May has, in good faith, put together an amendment, worked with the law clerk to present something. And I think for yourself, and please don't take this personally, Mr. Chair, I have great respect for the office that you hold and for your commitment to this country. But at the same token, I think that there may be different, Ms. May's motion or amendment here doesn't change the goal. It changes the method that the government would use to achieve that goal. And again, this is more on the accountability side than the implementation of the plan side. So with greatest respect, Mr. Chair, I have to challenge your ruling on this. Sure. I do think that she deserves a chance to present this as a formal amendment and not to be ruled out of order.
Okay, so it's a challenge, so there's no debate. There's no debate on this. And we'll have a vote.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Could you just clarify what we're voting for?
Well, what it is I've ruled PV 16 out of order because it brings in the concept of carbon budgets and nowhere.
Mr. Chair, I put forward there's supposed to be no debate. You can't debate in your own defense.
No, we're not. Okay,
I'm not debating. I'm just asking what the question is. That's all.
Well, Mr. Chair was giving his answers, and that does get into the premise of debate. If we have a recorded roll call, that would be helpful.
Well, this isn't consistent, Mr. Alves, with your previous comments. You said members, even when something is out of order, should have.
I've made the motion, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Albus is usually a stickler for the rules when it benefits him, but here's an opportunity for the chair to present his findings in accordance with suggestions
without
that Mr.
debate.
Albus has made. Again, Mr. Albus, I have the floor, not you. You're keen on quoting the rules to the rest of us, but it's unfortunate that you don't follow them when someone else has the floor. So the chair had the floor, and I hope Mr. Albus respects that. And that was my point, Mr. Chair, that we should be respecting the fact when each other have the floor.
We're going to a vote, and as Mr. Albus mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, there's no time for debate. There's no debate when when we're challenging a ruling. But if somebody wants a point of clarification, which is what Mr. Saini was doing, I was trying to give him an answer. But we'll go to the vote. Madame Michaud, is it also a point of clarification? Because if it's a point of debate, I can't allow it.
Non, c'est pour clarification.
No, it's a point of clarification. So we are voting on your ruling or on the challenge? Well, the challenge is, of course, linked to my ruling, so the same. So we're voting on your ruling, correct? Yes. My ruling cannot be debated. However, you can express your opposition to it, and this is what Mr. Albus is doing, and we can vote on that. So we will put the question, Ms. Clerk.
Mr. Albus.
I'm going to ask the clerk, just so people are clear. When someone makes a motion to challenge the chair, that means if they vote in favor, that means they vote in overruling the chair's decision. And when they vote against, that means they're shutting down the challenge. Is that correct?
It's a good point, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
If I can intervene. So the question will be, shall the ruling of the chair be sustained? Donc, que la décision soit...
So shall the ruling be sustained?
So if you want to sustain the ruling of the chair, you vote yes. If you don't agree with the ruling of the chair, you vote no. So
I apologize, Mr. Chair. I had it wrong, and so I
it's good that you clarified, and I'm glad that we allowed a bit of a discussion. So go ahead. Let's go have a vote on this.
Okay. Mr. Baker.
In favor.
Mr. Biddle.
In favor.
Mr. Longfield.
In favor.
Mr. Saini.
In favor.
Ms. Sachs.
Favor.
Mr. Albus.
Opposed.
Mr. Genereux.
Opposed.
Ms. McLeod. Sorry.
Opposed.
Mr. Redekop.
Opposed.
Madame Michaud.
En faveur.
Mr. Bachrach.
In favor.
So that is 7 in favor, 4 against.
Okay, so the ruling stands now. I'll give an opportunity to Ms. May to present PV 17.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I'm anticipating your ruling given the last one, but I appreciate the opportunity to present it. Again, carbon budgets are the gold standard globally to make climate accountability legislation work. And as I remember, one of our witnesses, and I'm trying to remember now, if it's very embarrassing to remember, that very accurately put it, if you were trying to balance your household budget and you wanted to get to so much money saved in your bank account, you'd be doing a better job to budget for that year to year and have specificity around what you're trying to achieve. So again, the difference between a carbon budget and the way the bill is currently designed is that a carbon budget is a certain number of megatons reduced by year. We're operating in a carbon budget globally. We are at very grave risk of exceeding the carbon budget that would allow us to meet the Paris objective of as far below 2 degrees as possible and no more than 1.5 degrees. We are much more likely to succeed in meeting those targets by using the gold standard approach of carbon budgets than by using the bill the way it's currently structured. And I'm putting forward Parti Vert 17 in hopes that perhaps it might survive your ruling, Mr. Chair, and then survive a vote.
Thank you, Ms. May. I will rule the amendment inadmissible for the same reasons as under my previous ruling. And because it seeks to bring in a new concept. If the minister had, I'm not arguing the merits of carbon budgets, but if the minister had wanted to bring in carbon budgets, he would have mentioned it somewhere in the bill. So that's my ruling. I don't know if Mr. Albas wants to challenge that.
Yeah, well, again, Mr. Chair, please don't take this as anything personal, and I appreciate that. That shows why you're in the chair in the first place, because it's your job to carry the business, the will of the committee. And given the fact that we are in a minority parliament, one would expect that there would be more discussions around these things. I understand your position. I don't agree, though, that the parameters of the bill have made this where this exceeds it. And I also do believe that if we've asked Madam May to come to this committee with amendments, that we should be able to just dispose of it without actually having a full debate. And so in lieu of that, Mr. Chair, again, I'm just going to challenge your ruling.
Sure.
And we'll let you carry for the proceedings from here. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll have a vote. Who is interested in sustaining my decision? Say whoever is interested in sustaining my decision should vote yes, and if you disagree with my position, you vote no. Madam Clerk.
Yes, Mr. Baker.
In favor.
Mr. Biddle.
In favor.
Mr. Longfield.
In favor.
Mr. Samey.
In favor.
Madam Sachs.
Apologies, in favor.
Mr. Albas.
Oppose.
Mr. Genereux.
Oppose.
Ms. McLeod.
Opposed.
Mr. Redekop.
Opposed.
Ms. Michaud. Madame Michaud.
En faveur.
And Mr. Bachrach.
In favor.
That is 7 in favor, 4 against.
Okay, so my ruling survives. Now we go to PV 18. Ms. May, would you like to present PV 18?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate, although it's unusual, I would certainly want to just parenthetically appreciate that Mr. Albas's efforts to belatedly have debates on key concepts under Bill C-12. The process here, I think, has been offensive to full public engagement in the development of this legislation. I'll just say that on the record. This next amendment seeks to make it clearer that what the minister does in an emissions reduction plan, the current version, just to refresh your memories, we're still under section 10, of course, but this is sub 2. It's titled explanation, that an emissions reductions plan must explain how the greenhouse gas emissions target set out in the plan will contribute to the net zero by 2050. And that is amended in my proposed amendment from an explanation to a demonstration, that an emissions reductions plan must demonstrate how the greenhouse gas emissions target set out in the plan and key measures will contribute to achieving the net zero. Again, parenthetically, net zero by 2050 is not our goal, not if we want a human civilization to survive. We must ensure significant cuts before 2030 to meet the Paris objective, which is referenced in this bill, but the bill is not constructed around it. In any case, this is one small change that I hope the committee will consider. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Redekop.
I'd just like to ask Mr. Moffat, because it seems to me that demonstrate and explain are very similar. So I'm just kind of curious from Mr. Moffat's perspective, how this amendment, if it was adopted, how it would change the way the minister in the office relates to this legislation.
Well, I need to be careful that I'm not here to provide the committee with legal advice. I'm not here on behalf of the Department of Justice, but it's our view from a policy perspective in discussing this with the people who will be responsible for implementing the act, that demonstrate and explain have very similar meanings, and indeed the similarity becomes even more apparent when reading, in my opinion, although it's as a using French as a second language, when you read the French provision which talks about le plan précise comment, etc., décrits dans le plan permettront au Canada d'atteindre la carboneutralité. So the word précise is a little, so I would suggest a little in between explain and demonstrate. So in other words, I think there would not be a substantive difference in terms of what the act would require that the plan contain.
Okay, I don't have any. Ms. May, go ahead.
It's just a comment on Mr. Moffat's that, and it's on the French translation of what I was hoping for is démontre as opposed to expliquer. But if my amendment is satisfactory to the department as not just diluting the bill in the way they want it, perhaps this is an opportunity for the Liberals and NDP to prove that they haven't made an advanced decision that no Green Party amendments will be accepted, and they could accept this one.
Any other comments? Okay, we'll go to a vote. Madam Clerk.
So the vote is on PV 18. Mr. Baker.
Opposed.
Mr. Biddle.
Opposed.
Mr. Longfield.
Opposed.
Mr. Saini.
Opposed.
Ms. Sachs.
Opposed.
Mr. Albus.
Contre.
Mr. Generer.
Opposed.
Ms. McLeod.
Opposed.
Mr. Redekop.
Opposed.
Madame Michaud.
En faveur.
Mr. Bacharach.
Opposed.
Okay, so that is 1 in favor and 10 opposed.
Thank you. So it doesn't. It is defeated. Now we'll go to CPC 9. Mr. Albus.
Thank you, Chair. Mr.
Or maybe
Albus.
Ms. McLeod. Yeah. Okay.
I would like to move CP9, and hopefully we'll have some support from the committee to actually pass us. And I'll use an example of why we need to really understand the implications of what we're doing. I mean, we do know there is a climate emergency. We need to take action. But for example, if our action causes all our agricultural industry to shut down and create starvation, understanding the implications of our actions is absolutely critical. We had a number of witnesses that actually spoke for including some economic analysis in terms of what we're doing, including the minister himself. And let me quote from him. The focus needs to be ensuring that we actually understand what science tells us we need to do in order to actually to make sure this world is a livable place, and to do that in a manner that takes into account economic and social as to how we actually make the progress. And then I could go, but I will be respectful of the committee time. I have 4 pages here of testimony from witnesses. And as you know, we didn't have a lot of witnesses, but they all supported the idea of a government making decisions with sort of a full understanding of what they're making decisions about. So again, I hope perhaps unlike our other amendments that we might see support for this because it will make it a better bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Albus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And certainly Canada has been described as a big country that is difficult to govern. That's why many people refer to the first job of a prime minister is to maintain national unity. And many prime ministers have worked very hard to do that. Unfortunately, Mr. Chair, is that if we don't take, and again, we've heard many times at this committee during our hearings, what gets measured matters. What you measure, in terms of impacts, et cetera, will have an effect. And I believe that for full transparency and accountability, government should be including many of the measures that Mrs. McLeod has mentioned here. And I just would hope all honorable members would hear that there is a desire from various regions to know exactly what the plan is and what the impacts will be on their sector. And as parliamentarians, we should always strive to get that information and to make sure that it is a deciding factor, both from a social employment level, Mr. Chair, but also in terms of its potential impacts on national unity. I think that if we all want those good things to happen, we should include it in the emissions plan. and that to make sure that those things are taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay, we'll go to the vote.
Okay, the vote is on CPC 9. Mr. Baker.
Opposed.
Mr. Biddle.
Opposed.
Mr. Longfield.
Opposed.
Mr. Saini.
Opposed.
Ms. Sachs.
Opposed.
Mr. Albus.
For.
Mr. Jenneru.
For.
Ms. McLeod.
In favor.
Mr. Redekop.
In favor.
Madame Posey.
Michaud.
Ah, excuse-moi, Michaud. Oui,
Pas de problème.
excuse-moi. Oui, Madame Michaud. Excuse.
Contre.
Contre. Et Mr. Bacharach.
I'm opposed.
So that is 4 in favor and 7 opposed.
Okay, merci. Alors, l'amendement est défait.
Thank you. So the amendment is defeated. My next question to the members of the committee is, shall Clause 10 carry? I see no hands, so we can vote.
Yes.
Good. So
yeah, sorry, go ahead. Did I miss something?
Yes.
Okay, what did I miss?
I wanted to speak to Clause 10. Or you're going to go through the Clause 10.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, okay. Well, I didn't think there were any. Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's unfortunate that many of the amendments either did not get a chance to be heard or were just simply shot down. I would just simply say is that on behalf of the Conservatives, we do think that especially the last amendment that was spoken to by MP McLeod is incredibly important, that the government must take into balance meeting greenhouse gas emission targets against social and economic factors, including impacts on employment, different sectors of Canada's economy and national unity. Unfortunately, we are proceeding with a Clause 10 that does not strike that balance, Mr. Chair. And so Conservatives will be voting against this clause. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so the question is, shall Clause 10 as amended carry?
Mr. Baker.
In favor.
Mr. Biddle.
In favor.
Mr. Longfield.
In favor.
Mr. Saini.
In favor.
Ms. Sachs.
In favor.
Mr. Albus.
Opposed.
Mr. Jenneru.
Opposed.
Ms. McLeod.
Opposed.
Mr. Redekop.
Opposed.
Madame Michaud.
En faveur.
Mr. Bacharach.
In favor.
Okay, so that is 7 in favor, 4 opposed.
Okay, so Clause 10 carries. We go now to Clause 11 with CPC 10. And I just have to mention that if CPC 10 is adopted, BQ 12 cannot be moved as they amend the same line. So is it Mr. Albus who's presenting CPC 10?
Yes, I will, Mr. Chair. So first of all, colleagues, as you know, I've been a big fan of a slightly different approach than the government has taken in regards to C12. For those that are watching, C12, pardon me, C10 I'm not a big fan of either, but C12 takes a particular path where it's the individual minister designated. In this case, the minister that starts off with is this Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. And we think that a better response is to have that minister, the designated minister, to bring it to cabinet so that there can be a full debate at the cabinet table where relevant ministers and departments, in fact, all of them, Mr. Chair, in the Governor and Council, as it's called, would have an opportunity to debate and to refine exactly what is being debated, and that would achieve more buy-in. As you know, Mr. Chair, criticism of government often is that it exists in silos, and sometimes people will say to me, Dan, usually they call me Dan, they don't call me Mr. Albus like we do here. They'll say, Dan, why isn't one department speaking to another? We've seen multiple cases of this during the COVID crisis, Mr. Chair, where it seems that one department is doing something without coordinating with another one, and it can be very confusing for the public. So what we believe as conservatives is that climate change is real and is a serious issue that requires a serious response. And there's no better way to get a whole of government and all hands on deck scenario going than by having all the cabinet ministers, as I said, debate and then refine and then stand behind it. Now, right now, Mr. Chair, whether a minister wants to or not, they have to, because of cabinet solidarity, support Minister Wilkinson, who's the designated minister. What we want to do is have it so that every minister can have their say at the cabinet table and not just simply have to defend a plan that was made by a sole isolated minister who perhaps went and discussed with other departments, but it doesn't necessarily dictate that it's a whole of government approach or that those conversations are complete and represent all parts of the country. Instead, Mr. Chair, we're relying on a minister who, as we know, it's very difficult to be able to get a memorandum of cabinet through, and without having that buy-in from the governor of council, we don't think that you'll get as good a result. So, Mr. Chair, we believe that a different approach as conservatives is necessary. Again, by having a full discussion at the cabinet table, a ratification that every minister can stand by, and then probably be better informed when they speak to their constituents, or that they won't be left saying, well, I don't necessarily support something, but because of cabinet solidarity, I will just simply say I support what the Minister of the Environment, or in this case, the designated minister, says on this. So, Mr. Chair, we think, and we heard from witnesses, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, an eminent national stakeholder representing hundreds, if not thousands of chambers, and on even in the small district of Summerland, all of the businesses in the district are members of that Chamber of Commerce, and probably, Mr. Chair, would want to know that the Canadian Chamber of Commerce is being heard. That it's their voice here in Ottawa, and they came and did a very thorough discussion, as did many other stakeholders, including the Cattlemen's Association, Pulse Canada, and others. So I would hope that that this particular argument made today by myself will not fall on deaf ears once more, Mr. Chair, that perhaps Mr. Saini, who's so thoughtful and considerate, might decide that today is the day that he will side with Dan, as my constituents call me.
I don't see any other. And
then maybe someone might just decide that they want to debate this and thrash it out. That would be good for democracy, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Does anyone want to thrash this out? I don't think anyone's in a thrashing mood, so we'll go to the vote.
So CPC 10, Mr. Baker.
I'm not with Dan. I'm opposed.
Mr. Biddle.
Opposed.
Mr. Longfield.
Opposed.
Mr. Saini.
Opposed. Sorry, Dan.
Ms. Sachs.
Opposed.
Mr. Albus.
In favor.
Mr. Jennerer.
In favor.
Ms. McLeod.
In favor.
Mr. Redekop.
In favor.
Madame Michaud.
Contre.
And Mr. Bacharach.
Opposed.
So that is 4 in favor and 7 opposed.
Okay, so the amendment does not pass, and now we go to BQ 12. Madame Michaud?
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So my explanation will be straightforward. Clause 11 states that the minister will be able to amend an emissions reduction plan, but it's somewhat disturbing given that from the outset, the minister, the government said that they wanted to include their new target, their new 40 to 45% reduction target in the bill, but they didn't. So instead, they said that what they would use would be the nationally determined contributions, the NDC, which the Paris Agreement turns out every 5 years, and that will be sent in November 2021, according to the government. So in this clause, it certainly looks like that itself could be changed. The NDC could be changed, or that the figure itself for this naturally determined contribution could be changed without it necessarily invalidating the Paris Agreement. So I think that we could change the action plan, but not the target, and that's what we suggested. The minister may amend the emissions reduction plan, but not necessarily the target. Perhaps Mr. Moffat could shed some light on this. Earlier, with some of the government's amendments, we saw that the government sort of felt the target would be the NDC, but we don't necessarily have that NDC yet, if I understand correctly. So based on Clause 11, will the minister be able to change the naturally determined contribution?
So the bill will, as amended, would make the NDC the 2030 target. The government can amend the NDC from time to time. Indeed, the Paris Agreement calls on parties to continually increase their ambition. And as we have observed over the past few years, and most strikingly with the issuance of the so-called 1.5 degree report by the IPCC, the consensus around the science, around not just around the effects of greenhouse gases and climate change, but around the timing of and urgency for action can evolve. And so that is the reason why this provision is in the Act, to enable targets to be updated if, for example, there is an evolution in the science. And I would remind members that this authority would be constrained by the amendments that were made to the bill last week, which would require each successive target to be more ambitious than the previous one. So in other words, with that amendment and this this provision that's in the bill, it would be possible to change targets, but only to make them more ambitious, not to go backwards.
Est-ce que ça répond à votre question, Madame?
Is this a sufficient answer to your question, Ms. Michaud? All right, so it could be amended, but only to raise it, basically, as per the Paris Agreement, rather than it ever being lowered. Should that be specified in the bill, or is that already something that's understood? Is it just kind of generally understood, reading between the lines, that it should always be amended upward? But because given the way Clause 11 is written now, it could be in either direction. Otherwise, perhaps I could move a sub-amendment to ensure that if the minister does change the target, it's to render it more ambitious. Yes, I think that has already been done at Amendment G3 or J3. G3. Anyone else wishing to speak to this? Mr. Albus.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question to Mr. Moffat. If Block 12 passes, essentially the minister then would be given the ability to make changes. That's the essence of what's being called here. Is that correct?
Actually, I think it's the opposite. That the bill, as currently written, allows the minister to change targets, but only upwards. Only more stringently. The amendment before the committee at this time is to eliminate that provision, which would eliminate the authority to change targets.
Okay, just so I get it straight, can you say that one more time?
Sure. The bill currently allows the minister to change targets, to alter the targets, but only to make them more stringent. This amendment would eliminate the ability to change targets.
Okay, so that would be if people are concerned about the changing goalposts that happens, then that would be a plus. Is that for this particular amendment to pass? Is that correct?
I don't know if I should characterize it the way you did, but it would allow, it would fix the targets. It would make them immutable.
They couldn't be made more stringent.
Of course.
Is that correct? They couldn't be made more stringent either.
Exactly. And sorry, and I may be. Are we talking about? I'm sorry. I just need to make sure I would look at the amendment. Is it est-ce que ça concerne des cibles ou des plans?
Is this about targets or plans? Plans.
Plans. The plans must include a target, but this is referring to plans. So I apologize.
Okay, so can you just say it one more time though, just because that's where I think I've been confused here, and it's easy to do, so don't take offense.
Okay, so I'm just trying to scroll through amendments here, and maybe we should be referring this to the committee clerk so we're precise about precisely what is involved here.
You have a question for the clerk?
Well, just to clarify precisely what the implication of this amendment is.
Madame Thivierge?
Yes, since it's not a procedural question,
No,
it's a content question, so
Yeah.
it's a question for the officials. Yes.
Yeah. What I'm trying to understand, you'll have to. I'm really curious here. There's a difference between the plan and the target, right? I mean, is that correct, Mr. Moffat?
Yes, the plans have to contain the target.
But
they are different.
But so we know that we can increase make the target more stringent. As long as we can make it less stringent. That's been agreed upon, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
A target cannot be made less stringent.
Yeah. But here, Madame Michaud can correct me. It seems like Madame Michaud is saying, we should be allowed to change the plan if it needs to be more ambitious to reach a more stringent target. Is that what Madame Michaud is saying? You're on mute, Madame Michaud.
Pouvez-vous répéter la question, Monsieur?
Could you please repeat the question? I'm so sorry. Well, look, you're not speaking of the target, but rather of the plan. So you're saying that we should be able to amend the plan to make it more stringent in order to reach a more stringent target? Is that the sense of your amendment? Perhaps I'm not understanding you. Well, look, this amendment was drawn up before we voted on G3, stating that the targets can indeed be raised. So the argument behind this amendment was that should we fail, we wouldn't want to change the target, but rather the means and the plan. But G3 has, shifted things. So you're not asking to withdraw this? No, I'm not. It's not repetitive, though. It's not redundant. No.
we're getting close to 5:30, and
yeah.
I have to pull
Mr. Chair, I was just going to ask if we might proceed to a vote. I agree.
Okay. Well,
some people are still a bit confused, but I do think
have a vote. Let's have a vote.
Because of the
Mr. Chair,
vote.
yeah, again, just maybe Mr. Moffat can be completely correct, because he even had me going here down a certain path where I was thinking about voting for this, and I want to make sure that I understand 100% that what Madame Michaud is intending to do to the bill does what it's doing. Because from the earlier explanation, I got down a garden path, and I'd like to get back on the correct path here.
Yep. So apologies for taking you down the wrong path. So Clause 11, as it's currently written in the bill, allows the minister to amend a target or a plan. Again, we've provided that any new target must be more ambitious than the previous target. The amendment that is BQ 12 drops the target from this authority. So this authority would preclude the minister from being able to amend a target. It would be limited to giving the minister the ability to amend a plan in a manner that is consistent with the purposes of the Act. As I understand it from Madame Michaud, the objective was to ensure that the minister does not amend a target to make it less stringent. In my view, that's already been covered by a previous amendment that the committee adopted that ensured that targets do not be revised to be made less ambitious. And as I earlier indicated, it's the government's opinion that there is a need to be able to amend both targets and plans in order to ensure that they adhere to or account for emerging science or other such issues.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that, Mr. Moffat. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Can we vote on the amendment now? Okay, Madam Clerk.
Yes. Excuse me. BQ 12, Mr. Baker.
Opposed.
Mr. Biddle.
Opposed.
Mr. Longfield.
Opposed.
Mr. Saini.
Opposed.
Ms. Sachs.
Opposed.
Mr. Albus.
Opposed.
Mr. Genera.
Opposed.
Ms. McLeod.
Opposed.
Mr. Redekop.
Opposed.
Madame Michaud.
En faveur.
And Mr. Bacharach.
Opposed.
That is 1 in favor and 10 opposed.
Okay, so it doesn't carry. Is there any way we can finish the clause? Do we have to, or do we really have to disconnect at the moment, Madam Clerk?
I believe we really can't go much further than where we are at the moment.
Okay, so we'll stop here and we'll continue with PV 19 on Wednesday.
Mr. Chair, I don't know what time we're meeting on Wednesday. Nothing's posted on the
I'll tell
website.
You right. Yeah. Okay. So it's 3:30, but there's many votes, so we'll probably get started late. And we're seeking to be able to go to be able to do a 3-hour meeting if we can. We won't know till the last minute. So if we start late plus 3 hours, I don't know what time that would be. But I would encourage members not to book other appointments and activities because the committee motion that we adopted authorized us to do 3 hours, and we're working to get 3 hours, but it's still up in the air. So at least 2 hours, and I don't know if we'll start at 3:30 or 4 or 4:10 because of all the votes, but we'll do our best to start on time, and we'll do our best to get 3 hours in. Hope that answers your question, Ms. May.
It's certainly helpful. And I'm in an awkward position as enforced by your own motion to be here, but not told in advance when we're meeting next.
I know. It's an imperfect world. It's an imperfect world.
Yes, I know, but I appreciate your patience, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll bring down the gavel and wish everyone a good evening, and looking forward to seeing everyone on Wednesday afternoon. Meeting,
Mr. Chair.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.